My name is Varun Soni, and I'm the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life here at the University of Southern California. Over the course of this semester, Visions and Voices, the School of Cinematic Arts, the School of Religion, and the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life collaborated on a trilogy of book talks that explore the intersection of spirituality, technology, and well-being. I'm very grateful to everyone who worked so hard to make this extraordinary series possible. Several weeks ago, we hosted Jonathan Haidt to discuss his New York Times bestseller, The Anxious Generation, How the Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. Was anyone here at that event? Anyone? Cool. And then a few weeks ago, we hosted Deepak Chopra to discuss his New York Times bestseller, Digital Dharma, How AI Can Elevate Spiritual Intelligence and Personal Well-Being. Was anyone here at that event? All right. And tonight, we host the third and last book talk in this series with Rainn Wilson discussing his New York Times bestseller, Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. Was anyone here at this event? Yeah? That's good. You took my line, but that's why you are who you are. And listen, the world knows Rainn Wilson is a highly acclaimed actor and producer. Indeed, since the late 1900s, it's true, he has starred in some of our most beloved films and television shows. Shows like 6 Feet Under, Backstrom, Star Trek Discovery, and Utopia. And films like Almost Famous, Juno, Super, The Meg, and my personal favorite, Badass. And of course, for the rest of his life and for many, many, many generations to come, Rainn will be known and loved as the shy, quiet, introverted character Dwight Schrute from The Office. Do we have any Office fans in here? Anyone? The Office is probably the most watched show in television history, and Dwight is probably the most beloved character from that show, so you could argue that Rainn has brought to life the most beloved television character of all time. And so, of course, that's how the world knows him. But I'm lucky to know Rainn in a different way. I know Rainn as an interfaith leader, a prolific author, a powerful storyteller, a public intellectual, a creative entrepreneur, an environmental steward, a provocative podcaster, and as someone who fully embodies and promotes spiritual pluralism as a core pillar of his Baha'i faith. I first met Rainn right here in 2009 at USC. We did a big event together on campus called Belief Behind Bars that highlighted the plight of 7 Baha'i leaders illegally imprisoned in Iran. Since then, I feel like he's been to campus almost every year. He was our extraordinary keynote baccalaureate speaker a decade ago. Make sure you check out his legendary address on YouTube. He's spoken in my class multiple times. We've done campus events for his other books, Soul Pancake and The Bassoon King, each with more than 1,000 students, so this is a really intimate event we're having today. We've done online conversations during COVID. We worked together to support the Baha'i Institute of Higher Education. And just to prove my point, this is the third event he's doing at USC today. Talk about singing for your supper, and in this case, your lunch too. But my favorite stories about Rainn at USC are the quiet, intimate ones that I hear so frequently, whenever Rainn just drops by unannounced at our little building on campus to meet with our Baha'i student group. It means the world to them and to me that amidst his very busy life and career, and with so many demands on his time, he still shows up whenever our students need him. And that's the truth. That is the truth. Rainn always shows up whenever we ask him to. Always. He always says yes. He does so because he cares so much about young people and their spiritual lives. He walks alongside them, he counsels them, he consoles them, he inspires them, he enlightens them. He's better at my job than I am. And so this evening, we're very lucky to be able to discuss Rainn's new book, Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. A spiritual memoir and manifesto, it is an urgent, insightful, and very funny blueprint for the global spiritual revolution of consciousness that we can all be a part of right now. The format of this evening will be as follows. I'll ask Rainn a few questions, then we'll open it up for a larger discussion with all of you. The bookstore is here today. They'll be selling copies of Soul Boom after the event as well. So I encourage you all to buy a copy for yourself and also your 20 favorite friends and family members. I can't think of a better gift to give someone you love than permission to read and think about some things that really matter. And on a final note, Rainn has a very busy schedule, lives 2 hours away. I promised him we would, I'd get him out here at a reasonable time. So we're not going to do a book signing today. We're just going to do the book talk, and then I got to get him out of here. So I want to really make our limited time together with him count. And so at the end of the event, I just ask that you let Rainn and us leave. We're not going to do selfies or signings today. All right, so is everyone fired up? Yeah, you fired up? Are you ready to go? Please join me in giving a warm Trojan welcome to my friend and yours, the one and only Rainn Wilson. We're going to get right into it. Okay, so listen, your new book is called Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. What is a spiritual revolution, and why do we need one?
Well, I wrote this book during COVID. This really was a COVID... when COVID hit, I was devastated, confused, angry, anxious, and in a strange way relieved, because I was like, now I get to write the book I've always wanted to write about spirituality. And if you remember, during that time, there was a lot going on. There was the George Floyd murder. There was the Me Too, and an extraordinary number, Donald Trump's first presidency. There was an extraordinary number of things that left us all like questioning how things work and why things work the way that they do. And I took a long, cold, hard look around the world, and I realized that I grew up a member of the Baha'i faith. I left it for a very long time and have come back over the last 20 years or so. And part of my spiritual belief and spiritual charge, as it were, is that part of our spiritual journey is to help make the world a better place. That spirituality is not something that one does at a yoga class or gazing at a crystal, or something that makes us feel better for a brief amount of time, and then we continue going about our frantic, frenetic, overworked, stressful lives until we come back to our meditation app or our yoga class. That there is another element to our spiritual reality, which is Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, said, "Let all men be anxiously concerned of the needs of the age you live in." And he also and center your deliberations on its requirements. He also said that all men are created to usher forward an ever-advancing civilization. So there, in my faith tradition, there is a spiritual charge and responsibility to try and make the world better. One of the perspectives I wanted to offer in this book, there's many ways to make the world better. And by the way, you don't have to operate on a global scale. We can make the world better on our cul-de-sac or at our church or at our local school or in our own family system. But one of the ways that I wanted to think about a spiritual revolution was looking at all the broken systems in the world. When you really take into account how everything works, how we're treating the environment, how our political system works, how our education system works, how our higher education system works, how our healthcare system works, how our agriculture system works. These systems are built on the very worst aspects of humanity. They're literally foundationally built on greed and self-interest and one-upsmanship, and they're not built on collaboration and community and mutual cooperation. And we see them crumbling before our eyes. So why we need a spiritual revolution is the world is falling apart for a very good reason, because these systems can't sustain. They can't continue the way they are. I was speaking to a class, one of the classes earlier today, and was talking about, I heard this statistic that absolutely flabbergasted me, which was in the early 1980s, scientists and medical researchers discovered like how to cure malaria, but it was going to take more lab work and work to produce the medications, the vaccines, et cetera, to help cure malaria. And it remained uncured. Since the 1980s until the vaccine was released, I don't know, over the last decade or so, over 40 million people died of malaria. That's more than died in all of World War II. We had the technology and over 40 million people died. Why? Because our healthcare system, both in the United States and internationally, is based on profit. We have a healthcare system that's meant to cure people, treat people, make people better, and it's based on profit. And out of that, 40 million people died that didn't need to die until we finally prioritized. And why? Because poor people die. And usually people of color, and usually black people tucked away in Africa, and we don't think about their suffering or their plight on the international stage. There's countless examples of this kind of way of thinking. So when you say, like, why do we need a spiritual revolution? It's like, are you kidding me? I mean, look around. Look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now. Look at what's happening with immigration and refugees. I mean, you can go system to system to system and see we don't need another political party. We don't need a different corrupt, money-grubbing, greedy, backstabbing political party. One might be a little bit better than the other, sure, but we need to radically rethink how we do everything based on spiritual principles.
So in your book, you make the bold and rather audacious claim that a spiritual revolution can solve our enduring social problems, like you mentioned, racism, sexism, climate change, economic injustice, and other forms of hate and discrimination. In order to change the world or transform the world, though, many spiritual teachers of the past said we have to transform ourselves. So if we have this, in order to usher in a spiritual revolution that changes the world externally, what do we have to do to change ourselves internally?
That's a beautiful question. And let me go back to that yoga class and the crystal and the meditation app. That stuff is actually very important. And I don't mean to disparage any act of nurturing one's soul or spirit or heart. In the Baha'i tradition, we are taught that there is a twofold moral purpose that we are given. And this, again, is a spiritual charge that leads us in two directions. One is cultivating within ourselves the spiritual virtues of the divine, of God, however you want to think of some kind of divine force or source or energy beyond time, behind comprehension. Qualities that we all love in our real heroes of love and compassion and honesty and humility, kindness, gentleness. These are the divine qualities that our mission in this life, while we're in this physical realm, is to cultivate. We cultivate them. This reduces our anxiety. It fills us with purpose. It aligns us. It centers us. It keeps us more in the moment. It keeps us heart-centered. And it also keeps us not self-centered, but other-centered. And in charging these spiritual batteries, we then are able to take that energy and be of service to others that are less fortunate. If we increase our compassion to such a degree that we cannot stand or allow the suffering of other people, that's the kind of yin-yang balance, the dance of every spiritual tradition. And you can find this template in Christianity and Islam, in Hinduism and Buddhism. This is a universal of spiritual practice.
One of the principles and pillars of Soul Boom is to have a moral compass. For many people in the world, historically, their moral compass has been handed down to them in some ways by their faith traditions. But 51% of our students at USC are not affiliated with religion. And so when I talk to students, I often talk to them about calibrating their internal compass to point towards their own true north. It's an idea that I think young people resonate with, but how do they put it into practice if they're not religious? How do you cultivate or align yourself with a moral compass if it's not something you've inherited through the wisdom traditions?
Do you want to sit here? You can sit down. No one's sitting
Oh,
in
yeah,
these
please.
seats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Insist. Come on in, please.
Have a
There's
seat, please.
Seats up here.
Love to have you. There's a reserved for you. Look at that. Do you want to see a menu or just drinks or anything? Whatever you want. Welcome. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming. Okay. That's good. What was the question? No. But what was
Moral compass for people who are raised without religion.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough question. So there's a couple words associated with morality. I don't know that I have an answer for that one. I'd love to actually hear your thoughts on it. Because we can talk about ethics, which is kind of a culturally sanctioned right and wrong. It's not exactly morality or a moral compass. And we can talk about values. Values is something that really resonates with people. Like, hey, are you acting within your value system? Is our government acting in such a way that is aligned with your personal value system? What is it that you value about your values? But a moral compass, to me, has been consistently evolving through the divine revelation of the world's faith traditions. And I do believe that morality gets into a lot of trouble when we humans kind of try and align ourselves with the morality of the given day and just what our fellow human beings do. I'll give you an example. Slavery. If you had gone around in 1820 and said, hey, slavery is wrong. These are human beings. We can't enslave them. You would just get laughed in the face. It's like, wait, what? We're not going to abolish slavery. It's part of our economic system. It's always existed. It's existed throughout history. It's survival of the fittest. It's strong over weak. The people that are enslaved aren't really humans, or they're half humans or three-quarter humans or something like that. That is a faulty moral compass established by a society. So I do think that the great spiritual traditions, even in Christianity, love thy neighbor as thyself, except if they're black and from Africa, like that, it doesn't make any sense. It's going against the morality of Christianity. And thank God there was, in some ways, a spiritual movement to free the slaves in the United States, and just as the civil rights movement was in large part fueled by a spiritual movement of the black church. And that's where the demonstrators came from, and that's how the food was distributed, and that's where people spent the night, and that's how communication got across, and the inspiration was Jesus Christ and Mahatma Gandhi and passive resistance, and that was a Hindu, long-lasting Hindu tradition of nonviolence. And so there are, I believe, spiritual moral anchors that guide us in ways that we can't quite come up with ourselves out of our own best reasoning. Maybe an unpopular opinion. By the way, my son, every time I say unpopular opinion, my son goes, "That's your hot take." So that's my hot take on morality.
It's super hot. We are in a room now and on a campus now that's filled with content creators. Here on campus, our students are filmmakers, screenwriters, poets, stand-up comics, social media stars, musicians, dancers, video game designers, you name it, they do it. It's a campus full of storytellers. Martin Luther King said, we start to die the day we stop talking about things that matter. And as a content creator, you've always put out content that really matters, whether it's Soul Pancake, which was your video platform with over 1 billion views, to your podcast, Metaphysical Milkshake, or your Soul Boom podcast, or the book that we're talking about today. You're constantly putting out content that matters. What advice do you have for storytellers in this room, students who want to go on and tell stories and create content, and who want to develop and go deep into meaningful content in a culture or maybe at a time where that might not be encouraged?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question, and it's funny because I started doing kind of positive content, inspiring content, uplifting storytelling, spiritual content, life's big questions, philosophical dialogues, etc. In 2009, I've been doing it for a long time, 15, 16 years. And I don't even know that I have an answer about what that is. I think that a few things that I've learned along the way would be that, this is almost embarrassing to say, but a lot of times we call it chocolate-covered broccoli. Like, if you want to make positive content that's educational, uplifting, that is going to really make a social impact, you have to dress it up a little bit in terms of, like we had on Soul Pancake, we had a dating show, and I can't remember the name of it now. It's been a few years, that was all about implicit bias. It really was a lesson in implicit bias, where you sit two people down across from each other and like, what do you think you know about that person when you first see them? And then they list it. And then they kind of really get to know each other. And then by the end of it, it's like, what did you actually get to understand about that person? Like, oh, wow, they were a lot different than I saw at first glance. And it was a dating show, but it really was a show about something else. So I think it's important to understand that when people are looking at their phones or their computer screens or their TV screens, like they're there to pass the time, they're there to be entertained. But there are many creative ways to dress up storytelling in such a way that it makes the world a better place. And I think there's no greater calling than people that make stories that make the world better and bring people together. I think when that happens, and I've just kind of popped in my head, I was thinking about the movie Spotlight, which is all about, the cover-up scandal about pedophilia in the Catholic Church, and beautiful film. And there was a lot of debate about it before the film, but like something about that film and the film winning an Oscar and the way that it was done and the tenderness and the personalness in which it was created, it galvanized that as a reality of our modern culture and made a tremendous impact. And I think it's there's no greater calling that one can do, and it's really hard. I mean, part of it is like these platforms are very corrupt. I feel myself like we're putting out content on YouTube, and sometimes I get, frankly, like kind of addicted to YouTube, and I'm going through YouTube shorts and scrolling, and all of a sudden it's 45 minutes later or an hour later, and I've wasted all this time. And they have psychologists on staff to determine how algorithms can best work with the human brain and keep us just coming back to TikTok for more and more. And like, if you're putting positive content out on a platform that is of itself insidious, what does that do? I don't know that means we quit it, but I don't know what that means, but it's something to be discussed.
I mean, you talked a little bit about this with The Office. I think our last conversation, you struggled with the fact that The Office meant so much to so many people, but it was on network television that was trying to sell consumer goods to people, right? But that doesn't mean it wasn't great art. I think many people here would say The Office was great art because it moved us, it made us feel like we belonged, it made us feel seen, it comforted us. That's what great art does, and yet it came through a very commercial...
Yeah, none of us made The Office because we wanted to make the world a better place, or even provide... Let's make a show that will be a beautiful balm to people during COVID, during a mass, catastrophe. We just are like, let's make a funny show and kind of make it real, and I hope I can buy a house and pay off my student loans. So first thing I did, I got The Office 14 years after getting out of college, and I still hadn't paid off my student loans. My first check from The Office was paying off my student loans. I wasn't there to like, I want to be a part of something really special that will touch hearts for generations to come. I wish I could say that it was.
It was, wasn't it?
But it ended,
Isn't that
it
what
ended
it
up
did?
that way.
I think so. I think that's what it did. I will tell you this, as a Hindu American, the Diwali episode was the first time I saw my own community on network television, and it meant a lot. It really did.
Funny story about that. Maybe you were involved in this? Were you? I don't know if you were involved. Forgive me if I don't mention that. I got an email from the Smithsonian, and they were doing some kind of exhibit. Was it? It was an exhibit on Indian Americans or South Asian immigrants or something like that. And they just wanted to be in touch with Mindy Kaling because universally when they polled people, what do we want in this exhibit? They were like, props from the Diwali episode of The Office. So I had to connect Mindy with the Smithsonian to try and get some, I don't even know if they had props from it, but because that was such a seminal episode of television.
So speaking of Indians, Deepak Chopra was here a few weeks ago, and he said to our students, there are 5 major crises in the world that you're going to encounter upon graduation. The first 4 crises are the crises we all know about, the crises that many students are working to solve, the crises of war, justice, health, and sustainability. But then Deepak said the 5th crisis is the most important crisis. If we don't solve the 5th crisis, we can't solve the other 4. Not all of us can solve the other 4, but all of us have to solve the 5th crisis together. He said the 5th crisis is a crisis of joy. In your show, The Geography of Bliss, which I think was on Peacock, you traveled the world trying to unlock the secrets behind the happiest places on earth. Where did you go, and what did you learn that can help all of us solve the crisis of joy?
Yeah, so I got to do this wonderful television show that no one saw, called except her, called The Geography of Bliss, Rainn Wilson and The Geography of Bliss on Peacock. And we got to travel to 5 locations and look for happiness. Like, hey, what can we learn from other cultures about happiness that maybe we can take back to the United States? And as you know, one of those, what were the 4 crises before?
War, sustainability, health, and justice.
So I guess the third one, health, would be mental health. We're in a loneliness epidemic in the United States, and certainly anxiety, depression, addiction. There's so many other issues afflicting and affecting young people. And but on this TV show, we got to visit Iceland, Ghana, Thailand, and Bulgaria, which is one of the most unhappy places on the earth, because we wanted to see that. And then finally came back to Los Angeles, which is the second most unhappy place on the planet. I had a friend who said once, if you're ever in an airport and you're looking for the gate of people that are flying to Los Angeles, look for the best looking, most unhappy people. And that's probably the plane boarding for Los Angeles. So, yeah, it's not rocket science. And again, it has to do with a spiritual revolution. But when we saw people thrive is when they were in community. People thrive in connection with each other, and they languish in isolation, disconnection, and alienation. Our country right now lives in a heightened state of loneliness, alienation, disconnection, and isolation. And from, communal farms, coffee farms or cocoa bean farms in Ghana, from people in Iceland and the way that they celebrate nature, to Thailand, where kind of a Buddhist spirit of service to community happens. I interviewed this wonderful woman in Thailand, and she talked about how it was a tradition on a birthday in Thailand to not get presents, but to spend your birthday giving to others. So she would spend her birthday at an orphanage or at a monastery, or handing out food or giving out gifts on her birthday. Can you imagine we're talking about a spiritual revolution, and we're talking about reimagining systems. Instead of like a day in which everyone gives you like 27 presents, 19 of them you didn't even want, and you regift them. Guilty. Giving back on your birthday, like what a beautiful thing. But it's there was a famous study done by Harvard University called the Grant Study. There's been many books written about it. And it started in, I think, post-war, after the 40s, and maybe even earlier. Maybe it was the 30s. It was the 30s. And they studied something like 1,000 Harvard graduates over the decades. And they studied them through their 90s, and always came back to like polling them about spirituality or income, mental health issues, physical health, how much they exercised, etc., and to try and find out like what creates a life of wellness, of of joy, of bliss. And it really came down to one thing, and that was connection. The people that lived the most connected lives with family, friends, through their business, local community, their churches or mosques or whatever, they were the ones that lived the longest, had the happiest lives, and the most rewarding lives. It was simply connection. So that's, again, it's not rocket science. I mean, I would tweak what Deepak said about the fifth and most important kind of pandemic affecting humanity. And I think of all of the different pandemics, we've discussed many of them tonight, like the most devastating and the most daunting and the most corrosive is the pandemic of hopelessness. That people don't think that change is possible. That young people, especially, well, old people too, don't truly believe that we can make this earth a paradise. That we can build the kingdom of God on earth. That we can make this earth heavenly. That we can live without war. That we can live not only without war, because peace is not just no war. Peace isn't just like cessation of war. Peace is about living in bonds of love and unity and harmony. So if you have billions of people on the planet that don't believe that that's possible because humans are too big of assholes, that we're too animalistic and we're too aggressive and will never ever change, that's the most devastating spiritual affliction affecting humanity right now.
I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll open it up for a larger conversation here. And I want to take that theme of hopelessness. You know, there are three numbers that keep me up at night in the work that I do: 65, 35, 10. 65% of college students are so anxious they have trouble functioning. 35% are wrestling with a mental health challenge like depression. 10% have had thoughts of suicide over the last year. That means on my picture-perfect, beautiful campus that looks like a Hollywood brochure, there's 5,000 students walking around today who have had thoughts of suicide, 2,500 who have a plan. You were a college student once. You were also wrestling with hopelessness, with anxiety, with depression, with addiction. What would you tell yourself as a college student, or what would you tell a student sitting here today who's going through similar challenges about the importance of having hope and the practices for cultivating it?
Well, that's going to be the topic of my next book, which I just, on my notes app, I just take thousands of notes and pull quotes and put ideas down. I don't have any sentences written yet. Don't tell my editor. We have the same editor. But how do you disconnect hope from meaning? You can't, really. Meaning is a strange word. Some people prefer purpose, mission, vision. But I think a really important question for a young person to ask themselves is not, and I'm not meaning this in terms of suicide, I'm really not, or suicidal ideation, but why do I exist? Why do I exist? Why is it important that I exist? Should I not exist? And I'm really speaking more philosophically. I'm not talking about like ending one's life. But why do I exist? And I found for myself when I was going through a really difficult mental health crisis in my 20s with anxiety attacks, panic attacks, depression, alienation, loneliness, addiction, that those questions, those 3 a.m. questions of like, why do I exist? Should I exist? Helped lead me on a spiritual path to try and find some kind of deeper meaning. It was the 90s. I told this story earlier, forgive me. It was the 90s, and there weren't meditation apps. There weren't podcasts about the meaning of life. There weren't self-help books. Therapy was not something you could just kind of pick up a phone and do. It was, so the only path I knew to take in the 90s was to dig deep into spiritual traditions and spiritual wisdom from all the different faith traditions. And I read the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita and the writings of the Buddha and the Quran and eventually the writings of the Baha'i faith, which I ended up rejoining. That question, why do I exist, has an answer, and it has a number of answers and valuable answers of I could go on, and there's so many different ways to answer that question, but we are all little shards of divine purpose in this world, and we all have incredible light that is unreplicable within each one of us, and our hearts are capable of things that we can't even imagine. How much good and how much light that we can bring into the world, how much joy, how much imagination, how much peace, how much connection, how much radiance. And these are shards of the divine that are within each of us, no matter what faith tradition you walk, no matter if you consider yourself spiritual but not religious. It doesn't really matter. There is a sacred path for us all to walk. We are all artists, we are all poets, we are all lovers, and we are all longing for beauty, and we can change the world, and we can make our lives better, and we can make other people's lives better. And it's right there, but there's a little bit of work to be done. There's a little bit of there's some research and some study and some contemplation and some meditation and some prayer, and there's readings of, the hidden words by Baha'u'llah, and there's the readings of the Dhammapadas of the Buddha and the wisdom of the Gita, and the writings and the red letter writings and sayings and doings of Jesus Christ from the Bible. So there's a little bit of work to do. It may involve some psychology, some therapy, unpacking all the things that are getting in your way. But so hope really is tied with to meaning, I think.
Beautiful. And I'm serious. Like, Soul Boom is a blueprint for helping you do this work. You should, if you haven't read it, check it out for sure. Now we're going to do some Q&A. Fong, do you want to grab the mic maybe and run it? It's right there. Thanks, Fong. He's going to.
And it's a huge international bestseller too. I'll have you know that the book is published in 2 languages other than English: Italian and Lithuanian. Any Lithuanians out here tonight? Make sure to pick up a copy of Soul Boom in Lithuanian if you happen to speak Lithuanian.
They had a great basketball team in '92. Okay, so we got, yes, we're going to just go around. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself to Rainn, and then you can ask your question or comment, whatever.
Hello, Rainn. My name's Kai. I'm a freshman here. And I'm just curious, you talked about the pandemic of hopelessness, and I'm curious how you advise to balance that, because I think all of us would agree that there is a lot of hopelessness in the world where we feel like we can't really change these issues that we need to be working towards. But how do you balance fighting that with also a healthy amount of realism? Because there are a lot of the problems in the world. Like, I'm in the sustainability sphere, and there are certain processes that we are just so far in that certain problems are inevitable, and it's just a matter of how we address them. So how do we balance fighting hopelessness with also acknowledging that some problems are kind of like really far gone?
Yeah, I think, I think thinking about world peace and joy and sparking hope and a belief that we can change, a lot of people roll their eyes at that, and it's kind of like hippy-dippy. And you're right, you have to be really kind of insanely practical about how that gets done. I mean, I can rant against consumerism, but I order stuff on Amazon, one click ordering on my phone all the time. Like it's woven into, like, what am I supposed to do? I'm get into my car and drive down to the family-owned store that sells doorknobs? Like, no, there's none like that. I can drive to Home Depot, another multinational corporation. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it is like there's issues there. I work a lot in the climate change world, and people say, well, what can we do in terms of climate? It's like, Not a whole hell of a lot, honestly, on an individual level. You know, you can go vegan, that helps. Recycling, guess what? Doesn't really matter. Really doesn't. You can limit your carbon footprint. Helps a teeny little weeny bit. The carbon footprint is from manufacturing and concrete and transportation and factory farming and deforestation. That's 90% of the footprint right there. You know, I'm not saying do nothing about climate, but you're absolutely right that when you're talk about something like climate or sustainability, you have to think in completely practical terms and oftentimes work within a system that is itself really broken. You know, you might be able to, as a doctor, really affect positive change in the healthcare system, even if the healthcare system is grotesquely corrupt and owned by 5, insurance companies, let's say, or hospital companies. So we have to work within and without the system. But we also have to have that conversation about the 20,000-foot view of the systems and how can we potentially change them in a radically different way.
Hi, Rainn. My name's Jackie. Thank you for being here. I'm a senior music industry and entrepreneurship student. And I sat in a class yesterday where we had a guest speaker take us through a ton of AI tools. And we spent about an hour and a half essentially making an entire business, a website, an app, a marketing plan. And it was really cool, but I was also really scared about it replacing a ton of jobs. And I know it's probably been a huge topic nowadays, but you talk about art being such an important, humane thing that connects us all. So where do you see our roles in that going forward, and how can we use spirituality to propel us and mitigate that taking jobs?
Boy, that's a tough question and a good one. Thank you. I really don't, I'm so not qualified to speak about that. You know, I'm just a silly actor and a occasional podcaster and closet philosopher. But, I think that careers come and go. In 1905, if you wanted to light a room like this, it would be lamps filled with whale blubber. And then the whaling industry went away with the advent of the electric light bulb, and all of a sudden there was electricity. This has happened throughout human history. It's actually fascinating to kind of connect the dots there. So I'm not necessarily, I think a lot of jobs will be lost from AI. A lot of jobs were lost from just the internet. I mean, I remember when you used to have to call a travel agency in order to buy a plane ticket, or go into, talk to an actual person at Continental Airlines, which doesn't exist anymore. And you know what I mean? But again, the more important question is how do we want to build a society? What is our dream of a just and fair and loving and compassionate society? There's always going to be tools like AI or the internet that can be used for good or can be used for evil. We have to be making these decisions in consultation and with a just and fair government that is accurately reflecting the needs of the people and working in public service, which we don't have. And figure out in what ways we can use AI and which ways we can't, and support, certain occupations that are in danger of losing their jobs. It's just a larger conversation. There's not an easy fix for it, but I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot of changes coming along. But it's important that we just be having this conversation.
The great Persian mystical poet Rumi said that the reason there is counterfeit gold is because there's real gold to be copied. So the reason there's artificial intelligence is because there's human intelligence to be copied. And right now, I think we have to fully embrace what it means to be human in a way that AI cannot. AI does not think about life and death. It does not feel hungry. It does not think about its own, well-being, mortality. It does not make friends. It does not, at this point, make great art. It cannot express itself in the language of emotion. It does not have transcendent or mystical experiences. It doesn't have sex yet. But there are things that are still.
It does.
It does.
It does.
There are still. There are things that
I've heard.
You heard. There are still things that are uniquely the domain of human intelligence, regardless of how professions shift. Rainn's right. From the beginning of human history till about 200 years ago, 95% of us would be involved in the production of food. Period. That's it. We would all know how to grow our own food. How many of us grow our own food now? 1% of the population is involved in food production, yet we eat better than we've probably ever eaten, right? And so those jobs will change, but the aspiration of what it means to be human and to live a human experience and to embrace that in its totality does not change. And so I think that yes, there's going to be a lot of things AI can do better than us, but it can't be human yet better than we can. And so maybe the jobs of the future are the jobs that require empathy, cultural competence, a sense of humor, a sense of calm, like the ability to collaborate with other people and work together as a team on a common goal. Maybe that's the stuff that remains, you know? So we'll see.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
All right.
Hi, Rainn. My name is Marios. I'm a sophomore computer science major here. I just had you talked about this earlier, but you mentioned how we need this spiritual boon in order to like reinvent our societal structures and create sort of a utopic paradise. And as an atheist, personally, like spirituality feels like it doesn't sort of resonate as much as like a moral sort of revolution. And I want to understand the necessity of a spiritual boom as opposed to just a moral revolution.
Yeah, I mean, this is an age-old conversation. I think that, I certainly think that atheists and theists can work together for peace. I think that, I think atheism has its limitations in seeing the world solely as made up as a random assortment of molecules without any meaning other than meaning that we find in it, if we're lucky enough to find such a meaning in it. And then at the end of the day, when we die, it's the light bulb's off and that's it. To me, that feels there's a hopelessness quality that's baked into atheism. It's a meaningless life and then you die. So I think that there are spiritual ideas that have to do with humans striving for something greater than themselves, in service to something greater than themselves, that building the kingdom of God on earth or a paradise on earth, although from my perspective as a Baha'i, it doesn't matter what religion you are necessarily there, or if you're spiritual but not religious, but there are things to be learned from taking that path. And I think that organized religion has caused a lot of people trauma and caused a lot of pain in the world. And you look at what's happening in Gaza from two religions that supposedly honor peace above all things. Islam means peace, and shalom means peace. And look at what's happening. I'm not talking about sides or anything like that, but it's very easy to, and rightfully so, to dismiss organized religion. But I say in Soul Boom, have we thrown the spiritual baby out with the religious bathwater? Is there something precious and beautiful and true about a soul connection or a heart connection above and beyond a reasonable connection? Have we lost that in jettisoning everything having to do with religion? And we talk about community and connection. And to me, it's not any surprise that we've let go of organized religion, for very good reasons, but we've jettisoned organized religion over the last 50 years, and we've seen this great rise in the mental health epidemic and disconnection among people because churches and religious gatherings did give us something beautiful and good and true at their core of mutuality, respect, people helping each other, sacrificing of your own time and energy to bring a hot dish to a neighbor that's suffering. So I think that there is it's a great conversation, and I don't want to leave out the atheists, and some of the best people I know are atheists, and some of the smartest and kindest and most giving people I know do not need any kind of spiritual compass to guide them towards goodness. So I want to acknowledge that as well. Thanks.
And I'll say there's been a shift, at least I've seen on campus, from using the term atheist to using the term humanist. For me, like, atheist is what I don't believe in, but humanist is what I do believe in. It's easier to be in a community that believes in something than that doesn't believe in something. And so if you're a humanist, right, you still could be an atheist, you call yourself a humanist, then I believe in human goodness, I believe in human virtue, I believe in science, I believe in sort of my empirical reality. I have something sacred in my life, human goodness. I think that is a sort of what you're talking about in terms of a moral revolution, that you need something sacred. What we call it might be different, but in finding something sacred, we might be able to find a connection with each other.
That's beautiful. I'm going to steal that.
Maybe I can help you write this next book. We can do it together. Okay, a few more questions.
Hi, my name is Amber. I'm a graduate student studying molecular pathology. And I have a question. So nowadays, I see there's a trend of, there's more and more lack of empathy and talking to loved ones and friends. You mentioned like the war in Gaza. Like, it's really easy to just turn your phone off or skip through a story, or when things aren't being represented in the media. How would you approach conversations with loved ones about like why you should have empathy for other people, or people that aren't in your home or in your community? Like, how would you navigate those conversations and explain why you should care about things that are going on in the world?
Beautiful. And can I just add one thing? Especially now that we have phones and we know about every terrible thing happening in the world, sometimes we can have empathy fatigue, So
Right,
how
right.
do we manage all that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a TED Talk by Peter Singer, great atheist. And he was talking about, he showed footage of this road in China where a young little girl had been hit by a car and was bleeding to death in the street. And people were just walking around her, riding their bikes around her, cars driving around her. And this caused a big scandal in China. And this went on for some time. It was just gruesome to watch. And he said, "Isn't that terrible?" And everyone was like, "Oh, it's terrible. Oh my God, I can't believe it." And it's like, but this is happening every day. It's happening in Sudan. It's happening in Yemen. It's happening in Chad and Gaza and in Ukraine. There are little girls bleeding to death, and we're not doing anything about it. And it's easy, like out of sight, out of mind. But I think that I would love to define, empathy as feeling something, and compassion, feeling something that leads to action. And I think that these qualities need to be, I think there's two things. I think they can and should be trained into children. And it's important when teaching children and raising children that we're teaching them these spiritual virtues of empathy and compassion, because it's a muscle that needs to be flexed. And if you don't, it's kind of easy to go through your day and not use that muscle of compassion. I also think that the internet makes it very easy to be uncompassionate, because you log in as like Lumberjack 47 and you like leave all these comments, and people leave other comments and they're like, "Fuck you," and "You're a dick," and suck it, and it doesn't there's kind of a disconnect. It doesn't feel real. It feels almost like a video game in a way. And even how wars are fought these days. I'm not saying that were fought nobly in the past, but wars are literally fought on computer screens with drones and like a video game. And we just get disconnected from the human experience. But it's part of our own job to train our own compassion and to be noticing and I do it myself. I can easily get judgmental and just be like, "Oh, that person's full of shit," or "Oh, screw them." And then I have to kind of take a long, hard look in the mirror and pause and say, "Rainn, what is it about you that you have this knee-jerk reaction? can you look deeper? Can you go deeper? It's part of our own training as well.
Okay, next question. We maybe have time for 2 more.
Hi, Rainn. My name is Ryan. Kind of close.
Hi, Ryan.
Hello there. I have a question. I'm actually very curious to hear your thoughts about ego as a performer, but also someone who's very spiritual, kind of what your take is on ego and like subscribing to all the thoughts and emotions that go through our brains.
Beautiful question. I love this question. So the Baha'i faith was founded in Iran, Persia in the 19th century by a man who went by the title of Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God. And Baha'u'llah spent his whole life in prison, being tortured, his stuff taken away, his family members killed, his followers killed, exiled. And his eldest son, after the revolution of the Young Turks in 1917, was freed from prison for simply being a Baha'i, from simply teaching world peace. And he went traveling, and he went briefly to Egypt, briefly to Europe, and then he took a trip for almost a year to the United States and North America. And he did a speaking tour. He spoke in churches and in organizations, and he spoke at the second ever conference of the NAACP, as a matter of fact, turned down an invitation to meet with the president to keep that appointment. Spoke on social justice issues and issues of love. And when he landed at New York Harbor, there was a reporter who said, "Hey, do Baha'is believe in Satan?" And he responded, "Yes, they do," which was kind of shocking because Baha'is don't really believe in Satan. And he was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Satan is the insistent self." The insistent self. And I love that because we all wrestle with the insistent self. I want things my way. I want it done now. I want it done quicker. Why don't these people do what I want? Why didn't I get what I needed? Why didn't I get that raise? I should have had that. There's envy, greed, aggression, one-upsmanship, resentment. All of those little emotions are part of the insistent self, and that's Satan, not some guy, not some being with a pitchfork in a nether realm, who's a fallen angel or something like out of a comic book. So to me, that is one of the most ancient, like top 5 spiritual questions of all time is ego. And ego is always the impediment. The insistent self is the impediment to enlightenment. It's the impediment to connection. It's the impediment to spiritual growth. It's natural, and I think it's super important we understand that ego is hardwired into our bodies and our beings. It's not to judge it as like, oh, it's so evil. We have a brain, and our base level of our brain is our pulse and our breathing and our autonomic, functions. And then it's like, is it the amygdala that's fight and flight above that? And all of these animal impulses. Ambro knows because you studied neurobiology. Am I right? The amygdala is fight, flight. I want what I want. I'm hungry. I need to get this thing. I want to have sex. I want more stuff. And I'm going to have AI sex. And that just grosses me out thinking about that. Like, how?
Sorry, too soon.
Anyway, Fong knows. What was I saying? Yeah, so and there's the prefrontal cortex on top, that's our higher brain function, reason, kindness, spiritual virtues, connection, compassion. These are all kind of later developments in humanity, So when we have those baser impulses of the ego, just to understand, like, hey, I'm hardwired to eat and have sex and to get what I want and try and get what I want and accrue more stuff and that's okay. That doesn't mean that it's okay to live as a victim to that, but to embrace that as a part of who we are as humans.
So we have time for one more question. Who wants to ask it? Let's go right here. Yes, you. Yep. Wait, just please wait for the mic and yep.
Hi, Rainn. My name's Jihad. I'm a graduate film production student. My question is, how do you think, or what do you think are good ways to go about introducing other people to spirituality, beginning conversations about spirituality? Because a lot of my conversations with my friends, I guess they start at personal enlightenment, and then 20 minutes in, we're talking about like the fifth dimension and relativity and things. And there's this like, I think, I don't know, this interest in speculating all the wonder of that, but then, and this hunger inside to, look for something more, but then this apprehension at, I guess, really putting that into your life and practicing that daily and believing in something that you can't really see in the physical world. Sorry, that was really long.
No, that's okay. That was a great question, and it's a great question. It really is. It's, I think you can start with Soul Boom, Why We Need Spiritual Revolution, available at bookstores near you. Are you selling those or giving them away? Selling them? No. All right. I get like $1.50 per book, I think, if I'm lucky. Look at that. I'm cleaning up tonight. $17 I'm making. I'm actually working on right now with a dear friend of mine, a business partner, a co-author, a Soul Boom workbook, which we want to make like the artist's way for spirituality. So a journal, a thought provoker, creativity, creative writing, pondering, contemplating. And I'm hoping that there can be some book clubs that maybe spring up around that. And maybe that's the way to go, is like a book club around some kind of spiritual text or something like that. Eckhart Tolle has a couple of wonderful books out. There's Michael Singer has some great books that are kind of entry-level spirituality ideas. That's one thing, but I think people are hungry for spiritual food and spiritual conversation. They're hungry for that. But you're right, it can quickly go to your last ayahuasca trip, and seeing the eye of God. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think I think a lot of young people think either I'm grateful or I'm not. Either I have love or I don't. Either I'm a good friend or I'm not. But you're students, and you can get better at things that you practice at. You are really good at being students, really good at being artists, really good at being athletes because you put 10,000 hours into all of that. So there is a way to go deep in practice. It's in spiritual practice. So the spiritual conversations are really important, but what about the practice? How do you go deep? How do you get better? You can think about the things you love as your spiritual practice. The way you make films can be your spiritual practice. The way you commune with nature can be your spiritual practice. Having a dinner with someone you love can be a spiritual practice. Dancing. Dancing is the number one thing to make you feel better above and everything else. If you feel bad and you dance to a song you love, you won't feel bad. Why is that not a spiritual practice? So part of it is just claiming the things that are already spiritual to you as a spiritual practice, and then practicing and getting better and going deep. And it takes 10,000 hours to be a master, but it only takes 3 weeks to change a habit. That's why everyone has a 21-day meditation challenge, weight loss challenge, bicep challenge, whatever the challenge is, it's always 21 days because that's what creates muscle memory. So think about something that is sacred to you, make it a spiritual practice for 21 days, and then see what that means for you.
Yeah. I did a 21-day donut challenge.
Oh, yeah? How'd that end up?
I'm still going. You're right, it turns into a habit. That's very well said. And I think, gratitude lists are a great entryway into deeper spiritual connection and also, a meditation practice. And meditation is much stronger in groups, by the way. Meditating in a group through brain scans and studies, has a much more lasting effect. But listen, folks, I would love to stay and sign books, and I would love to do photos with you, but not really, because I need to get home because I've been here all day and I'm exhausted and I have a big day tomorrow, and so I'm going to have to skedaddle, but I really want to Thank you all so much.
Listen, Rainn spent 4 hours on the road to spend 1 hour with us here. So please give it up for Rainn Wilson. Make sure you pick up a copy of Soul Boom or 10. And we'll hopefully see him next year.
Thank you, Fong. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, USC. Dr. Varun, Soni.